You are now entering the MxU podcast. No credentials required.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 161 of the MxU podcast. I'm Jeff Sandstrom, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend, Dadu Worldwide himself, Jay Desai. How are you, buddy?
Man, I'm doing great. How are you, Jeffrey?
I am good. It is a cold and gloomy February day. It's leap year day, though. It's like February 29th. So anybody who's born today, like, and maybe somebody can chime in on this, I don't know, but anybody whose actual birthday is February 29th, like, when do they celebrate? Do they celebrate March 1st, or do they celebrate February 28th? Or do they celebrate every 4 years and a 24-year-old is actually only 6?
That's weird. I would just say let's get 2 days. You get 28th and the 1st.
Yeah, you get both. Okay.
Yeah.
Half and half, or 2
Yeah.
full days?
2 full days, bro. Just straight up 2 full days.
I love it. Yeah, that's good. Well, if
Also,
anybody's birthday
I
out
called
there,
you Jeffrey, which feels weird.
no, it felt actually respectful and dignified. I didn't hate it.
Yeah, that's why it felt weird. But then again, it's like when you like if your name was Buddy when you were a kid, but your real name's like Steve. When you're older,
Right.
people revert back to calling you Steve. So it feels like at your season of life, that's the nice, respectful way to put it. Jeffrey is a
Okay.
little more distinguished,
Yeah, you're just calling me old. That's okay.
Yes, and I'm now respectfully calling you old, but your hair looks good. You got a haircut.
Got it yesterday. Yeah, a little high and tight. You gotta, keep it cleaned up. We've been shooting a lot of content for MxU, and so I noticed the last week when I was there, my hair was looking kind of ratty. So I had to get it cut this week before I go back to Knoxville in a few days to record some more videos. We're actually filming with the founder of Philo, Mr. Todd Elliott himself.
What
He's
a
going to
great guy.
talk to the good people about some leadership principles and how to build a healthy team. And he's going to talk some about his book and bring forward some of the principles from that book, which is called I Love Jesus, but I Hate Christmas. So if you are a production person and have not read that book, you need to go check it out, because he's got a lot of great things to say to people who are in the thick of it with production and sometimes feel overwhelmed. So it's a good read.
I like that, and I like Mr. Todd Elliott. I've gotten so many comments about our podcast from last week with the sphere with Tone talking about
Oh yeah.
what we were talking about with Tony, and then people just wanting to know what or more about the experience. And I should just give him McCormick and Swinford's phone number and let those two take those calls. But
that would be
I'll
good.
nice.
When we're in the throes of, working for Chick-fil-A, and they get some random call from a church tech director in Des Moines going, "Hey, talk to me about your experience with the Sphere." And they're like, "Oh man,
Wait,
I'm making
that
waffle
dude gave me your
fries."
cell phone number. That was nice
Yeah.
of him.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it really was great. So, well, what have you been up to? I mean, you've been filming videos, I know.
Yeah.
Were you
But
out?
last
Did I
week,
see you were out? Too?
last week I went to work with our friends at the Westfall Group doing a major donor event, which you're doing this week. But
Oh, yeah. Where were you?
my event, I was in Phoenix, Scottsdale, at the Troon Resort, which is an awesome place.
So
and
good.
we were helping the good people at Colorado Christian University raise some money, and so we had the Brenton Brown Band leading worship, and Brother Tomlin
The
came in for a
funniest.
special concert. Oh yeah, Brenton. I'm telling you, Brenton and his bass player Daniel Ornelas, who was originally with Tree 63, they are two of the funniest people. I mean, dry wit, quick, sarcastic, hilarious people. And then
Daniel
Brother
laughs
Tomlin came
before he
in
even
for a
gets a
little
joke.
concert. Oh, I know. It's incredible.
How was Mr. Tomlin?
Oh, he was great. It was just him and Daniel Carson, Chris's guitar player, and it was just them and 2 acoustics. And those guitars, I mean, they sounded so good. Like, they play
What do you put
these
on guitars?
so they play a really good sounding Taylor. They both have the same model, and the guitar itself sounds great. But the pickup, you know how some acoustics, like, you stand in front of the guitar acoustically and it sounds great, and then you plug in an instrument cable and the pickup just sounds like a cardboard box. That is not how these pickups sound. I mean, they sound like the guitar, and it's beautiful.
Well, what are they?
So for me, I don't know what the pickup is, honestly. I need to check because, they used to play Collings and they switched to Taylor. And now that I'm not with them all the time, I don't have all the ins and outs of the actual rig. But I will say, um, I was on a Digico Quantum 225. And so I just did a high pass filter in the console. And then I have my kind of standard acoustic preset in waves, which is just the SSL channel strip with a little bit of EQ. So I've got a little bit of boost in the red knob, which is the top end. And then depending on the guitar, I may cut or boost on the high mid. And then I'll cut like 400 to 500 in the low mid. And that's about it. Maybe 3 dB of compression. And man, it works. So it was fun.
That's great. I'm not gonna lie to you. I almost used your file because I have that same 225 from this week where I am, but I didn't.
Well,
You and I lay things out differently.
yeah. Well, I had a bit of a simpler setup than you have this week because I know you're doing a big event for Convoy of Hope, which is such a great organization.
Just great people, but I barely um, did anything on the acoustic today. I mean, a little bit, like you
That's
said,
good.
400, little 400 out, and I put it through some verb, and I have become just an F6 idiot. I call it. I put F6 on everything because I know I can just grab it. I
Yeah,
can grab it as an
that's great.
EQ. I can grab it as a floating EQ. I can grab, you can do the high pass, low pass, and you can just do so much in it. So I have that in
Yeah.
there, and then I put a little bit of compression, like you said, 2-3 dB, and it's amazing. The vocal though,
Well, your music
bro,
artist this week is a singer of singers. You've got Tori Kelly this week, and
and
she
man, can she sing!
is phenomenal. Yeah.
She brought her M80 capsule, and we just put it on our Axiate stick, and I did barely anything to it. I think I
Yeah.
just skadooshed a little on the 800 and skedaddled a little on the low mid, and it sounds amazing
Yep.
through some.
Well, you sent me a picture of the EQ, and it's like there's a high pass at 100 hertz and a little cut at 3K and a little cut at 400, and that is it, my friend.
Yeah, okay.
It's so nice when you can do
Sounds
that
so
with a
good.
singer that's just, yeah. It's like you don't have to
And some
touch
good
it. It
verb,
just works.
got some verb going. Nice long verb, and it just makes this ballroom sing. She barely
Love
had.
it.
I pre-mixed her ear. She had a few changes. She's, singing my praises from the microphone. I made sure it was in the
Oh.
red so I could play it back for everyone multiple times when they get mad at me. No, it's
I
honestly great.
love it.
She's very, very, very kind to everybody, and I always appreciate that. So
That's super cool.
yeah, that's great.
So you're doing that this weekend, and the calendar changes to March as of tomorrow. And in March, we have our first MxU pop up. Are we going to see you at the pop up in Phoenix?
Yes, I think that it would be wrong for you guys not to see me. I'm gonna do
Excellent.
my darndest to just pop in and hang out and love on people and just, try to be appropriate in my joking. So,
I love it. Well, for those of you who haven't heard, we're doing 6 of these regional events this year. Our first one is March 19th in Phoenix at Christ Church of the Valley, CCV, and we're excited to be there and for their team to be able to host everyone. They're excited about hosting you. Um, Go to getmxu.com and find out all the details and get your tickets. Tickets are going fast, but we still have some that are available, and we would love to see you in Phoenix on the 19th. If we
and
miss you
these are
there, then we're going to,
smaller,
yeah,
these are
yeah.
like
So
smaller, more intimate things. So,
exactly. We're going to have about 100 people in the room, and it really is a chance to kind of be around tables and have conversation and learn from each other, network together, meet people from other churches that are in your area that you may not know. And it's a chance for us to learn together, to get better together, but also just to kind of have a day of where we can just kind of breathe and relax and have fun. So we're excited. It's different from anything we've ever done. And we're excited about that too, because we're trying something new and want to see if this resonates with people. But I think the great part about it is that it is smaller, it is more local, so you can connect with people regionally who are in the similar trenches as you, and you can learn some of how they're doing what they do and give them some of your best advice as well. So it's going to be a great day. Just a 1-day event. We're going to start at 9 in the morning, and we're going to end the content for the day about 3:30, and then go do an outing and some dinner together, and we'll have you home in time to tuck the kids in for bedtime. So it's going to be a great day. And if you miss us in Phoenix, then we're going to be in DC, Dallas, Columbus, Ohio, Fort Lauderdale, and Seattle. So you have plenty of opportunity, no matter where you live, to get somewhere close, hopefully, to where you live, and come and hang out with the good people of the MxU community.
Just magic,
I love it.
Just magic. People all in the same space having a good time.
That's right. Well, hey, we have a pretty good interview today. It's more than pretty good. It's actually really good. Marcus from our team, who handles all of our content recording and video editing, and I sat down with two of our friends from Canon, Matthew Irving and James Liu, and we got to chat with them about all things Canon. So we know you're going to like this conversation. There's a lot of useful and helpful and fun information about what they have to offer. So let's get to that. We are really excited today to be joined by our friends from Canon. We have James Liu and Matthew Irving, who are joining us on the podcast today. Guys, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely.
Our pleasure. Thanks for having us. It's really a pleasure to be here with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to fill everybody in, you guys were at MxU headquarters a couple of months ago filming some content on Canon's products and just best practices around cinematic cameras and camcorders and PTZs and just the gamut of Canon's product line. And we were able to capture some really great instruction from you, Matt, primarily around just best practices for churches who are integrating, more of a cinematic look into their workflow, but maybe are considering things that they may not have before, like a camcorder or, a PTZ. So we'll get to that in a second. But first, I want to hear from you guys just about your background, your history, your journey into Canon. Also, we're joined today by Marcus Bowling from MxU, who was actually the person who captured all the footage and captures all of our footage for our video product for the platform. So Marcus, I'm glad you're here too, because I'm not a video expert and you are. So thanks for contributing to the convo.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, Marcus.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I've been seeing a lot of your face, but it's just,
Marcus had a few more cameos in the video shoot than he expected to, because a lot of our PTZs and cameras were looking out towards the cameras that were shooting me while we were doing the video. So Marcus, if you have a sharp eye, you'll spot Marcus in more than one of those videos.
Marcus is not used to being on that side of the camera.
Every time I met Marcus is in person. I haven't seen him online before. It's just in person every single time.
Yeah, and
never on Facebook or anything like that. Just strictly in person.
Well, and his social media is really only about cups of coffee or pictures of his daughter or views from a mountain bike. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Rarely a selfie.
He's using social media appropriately then. That's pretty much
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the good Lord intended,
That's right. Well, James, let's start with you. Tell everybody kind of who you are, what got you to Canon, what your background is, and what your specialty is.
Yeah, so I hopped on Canon about a year ago, taking over the House of Worship primarily in the West Coast. But right now I'm traveling the entire country. My role really is to find Canon solutions for house of worship. Growing up in church, a small church where we use PTZs a lot, it's definitely a learning curve for me to get into kind of that cinematic big cameras, like the Hollywood level cameras and lensing, like this one right here, in the mega churches. So it's a lot of learning curve for me. And I met Marcus for the first time out in what was it, MxU in Passion City. That was like one of my first time learning about all these things. And I came from more of a photography background, did landscape photography with Canon cameras, and then I did a lot of wedding photography also for about 8 years before I hop on here. I was working at another company with communication devices like wireless comms and wireless transmitters, wireless monitors, and mics. The wireless products really got me into the church world because I started realizing churches need those things. Churches love their wireless. Churches love anything that's compact, anything that just fits in the hand. They can run around with it. They can easily implement. That really got me into the church world, working with the system integrators around the country. And when the position opened up at Canon, here I am serving the churches across America for now.
Yep. That's great. Well, we really appreciate your support, both with the MxU live events and with our gear needs at HQ. Yep. I mean, obviously we shoot all of our video for the platform with Canon cameras and lenses, and it's just been an invaluable resource for us. I mean, the image quality and the ease of workflow has been awesome, and the glass looks great. So, I mean, we can't thank you guys enough for your partnership with us.
Absolutely.
Matt, how about you? Where are you from? What's your background? How'd you get into all this?
Yeah, well, I just joined up with Canon full-time 1 year ago, and I am currently a senior technical specialist, specializing in the cinema line of cameras and lenses, and also helping to bring a cinematic look to other markets outside of cinema and TV production. Before that, for 27 years, I was a cinematographer, a director of photography of feature films, independent features, narratives. I did some TV pilots and that sort of thing, but I was mainly a feature film guy, a member of Local 600, the Camera Union. And in between my feature work for 20 years, I would freelance for Canon, because one thing great about Canon is that they really embrace the creators. They embrace the people out there in the field doing it. They want feedback from those people. And they would have me come into their booths at huge trade shows and talk about the gear as someone who was using it in the field. So I already knew all these Canon peeps for 20 years before joining up full-time last year, but finally hung up my freelance hat and I went corporate. So now I'm with Canon full-time now.
That's awesome. Well, when you were at MxU with us filming, you told us some great stories from back in the film making days. And I know people would love to just kind of get a chance to sit with you and hear about some of those shoots. I mean, you started, back in the day when you were actually changing out film with cameras, not just SD cards and hyperdecks and whatnot, but, the actual process of recording and editing on film. For people who aren't as familiar with that side, just give us a story or two about some of your highlights from those days.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I shot my first feature as a cinematographer, as a DP in 1996, which was definitely back in the film days. And I was pretty much all shooting photochemical film up until 2009, when the digital wave sort of rolled through. So, but the key thing is, when you're starting in your career, and I think it's still true today, is that you can't have an ego about where you're at. So I was a director of photography of a feature film that went to Sundance 98, kind of put me on the map. And yet my very next job after that was as a film loader on a little indie feature. And then my next job after that was a first AC on an indie feature. And then I got my second feature as a DP, and then I was back to loader. So you can't really have an ego about it. And you kind of have to just embrace whatever gig comes along early in your career. And the great thing is, if you don't have an ego about it, and if you have a good work ethic, and you just make whatever job you're doing the most important job you ever had in your life, people will notice and they'll want to hire you on the next thing and want to take you up the ladder. So, but yeah, I'll tell you.
That's such good advice.
Yeah,
I think
that applies to any occupation.
Yeah, all
Not just video.
all throughout production world. I tell people all the time, it's like if you're a hard worker with a good attitude, you can be taught anything you need to know. I think,
So true.
on the audio side, there's friends of mine who are mixing front of house one day, and then the next day they're, prepping for a show in the warehouse, and then the next day they're loading a truck, and it's the nature of the business. But for you, I mean, to go from like, position A down to not so much in the matter of a day or two, it's just the way the industry works. But
absolutely,
that's so cool. There's such good advice there, man. So
yeah, but I'll tell you, loading film in August in the Valley in Los Angeles in a changing bag. You either had a tent to load in or you had a bag to load in. I couldn't afford the tent, so I had a bag. And you're loading these magazines. You can't see them because you're in the pitch black bag. Your hands are sweating all over the film while you're trying to change it as fast as you can and get it back on set. And man, those are days that I don't miss at all. Oh, okay, I kind of miss them. They were kind of fun. They were an adrenaline rush.
That's awesome.
Sure.
The final product was well worth it, I'm sure.
Yes, always.
Yeah.
And now you can tell the story of it. So that's even more worth it.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
That's
it's a
so
lot
cool.
easier to load an SD card than it is to load a magazine in the dark.
Yeah.
Marcus, were you even born in 1996?
That was the year I was born.
1997 right here.
That was
I'm just going to go now.
28 years ago.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Matt and I, we can commiserate on how we spent our lives in the 90s. Man.
That's why I was laughing so much. I was like, hang on a minute.
I actually texted that to Matt the other day.
Yeah, you did. I didn't need that reminder. But it was a really interesting perspective, though, to come up through film. And then as digital starts to take over, it's a completely different animal. I was really nervous to shoot my first digital feature because it's a whole different animal. You've got to protect for highlights a lot more, especially back in the early days of digital. Now it's a little easier with our Canon Log 2 and our Canon Log 3. It rolls off the highlights in a much more film-like manner than those early digital cameras did. Because how highlights went to white from how highlights rolled off was the giveaway, whether you were shooting film or video back in those days.
Yeah.
And now it's much better at imitating the kind of curve that film had in that regard. So it's
That's
nice to have
interesting.
gotten through that awkward period.
Well, you and I share, obviously I'm an audio professional, you're video, but we probably both share the experience of editing with a razor blade instead of cut and paste on a computer. And so that's something that Marcus and James will never know.
I have no idea what that is.
We can hold that over their heads for a long time.
I've been in a dark room, but I've never been in
I've never even been in a dark room.
Yeah.
What's great about editing on film, though, is it's where the term footage comes from. You hold a foot of film, and that's time. Yep. You're holding time in your hand. It's X number of frames in a foot of film, 40 frames in a foot of 16 millimeter film, I happen to remember. And so you're actually holding time in your hand. And if you have to make a one-cut change, you better be careful about that because there's no undo button. If you cut one frame short, you got to figure out a way to splice that back on in a way that's not going to skip through the machine. So it was a whole different animal back then. I'm sure you experienced that with sound.
Totally, yeah. So we would work with, a 24 track 2-inch tape, and we were running at 30 inches per second. And so, 30 inches of tape was a second. And so when you were trying to edit like a downbeat of a song or a transient hit on a cymbal, it was like you could scrub the wheels to get it to sort of where you thought it was right. And then I remember first time I made that first cut, it was like nerves with a razor blade going, okay, here we go. And cut it and tape it together and see what happens. It was pretty great.
But it's pretty fun. All the terminology we still use footage for terminology, even though there's no footage. We still use roll camera for something rolling on the camera. I think we should change that to commence data capture.
CDC for sure.
Yeah,
that's great. Well, what I loved about the shoot that we did with you, Matt, is your ability to teach, your ability to communicate clearly and concisely was refreshing for us. And so I'd love to spend a few minutes today just kind of reviewing some of the things we talked about. Um, let's start with the PTZ line, because there are a lot of churches who are trying to implement, PTZs rather than a manned camera in certain locations. So, talk about what a PTZ is, and some best practices, and maybe some things that Canon offers in their PTZs that may differentiate those products from others.
Great. So PTZ stands for pan tilt zoom, and it's a remote controlled camera that can be controlled just over Ethernet cable, just a LAN cable over the internet that you hook up to a controller, you hook up to a switcher. It depends on the size of your setup and how many cameras you're running and what kind of live switching you're doing. But the PTZ itself is pan tilt zoom from remote control. And so you can just from a controller, you can use the tilt and the pan and zoom in. So you can have the cameras far away and out of the way. You can have it so that it's not in the line of sight of any of your audience. It comes in black and it comes in white. So depending on what your decor is like, it can blend even more into the scenery. So the PTZ cameras are meant to give you the maximum amount of control over your image size, your camera moves, while staying out of the way and maintaining a low profile. So I know that in a lot of church setups, it's great to have several of them. You can hang them upside down and flip the image so that you can get them up in the rafters, sort of. You can have them hanging over the band, so you have overview shots of the band or an overview shot of the drummer, and then you can cut back to another camera that's got a close-up on someone else, a face in the crowd. So they're very, very flexible camera systems, and Canon offers a variety of them. It just depends on what your needs are. The first choice to make is if you want a 1/2 inch sensor or a 1 inch sensor. And this is going to make a difference in a number of ways. A 1/2 inch sensor is going to have more of a zoom range. So it's going to have a 20 times optical zoom. So you can have it farther back and zoom in more. But it is a smaller sensor, and smaller sensors the smaller the sensor, the less quote unquote cinematic the look becomes. If you have a larger sensor, the more you can isolate depth of field around your subject and have a more painterly background. So that's one of the trade-offs, is that you have your 1/2 inch sensor, better zoom range, but you don't quite have as much of a cinematic look, although you're going to be zoomed in a really far amount. And that's going to give you a separation as well, depending on how far your people are from the background. The 1 inch sensor is going to have a 15 times optical zoom instead of 20, but it's going to be better in low light. And that's a big thing about the bigger sensors, is the more you can have your resolution, your dots that make up the image, the larger they can be, those photo sites, the larger they are, the better at light collecting they are. So they're better in low light with less noise. So that's kind of what differentiates our smaller PTZs with the 1/2 inch sensor and our larger PTZs with the 1 inch sensor.
That's good.
And I know
So what about...
Right. James can speak to some sort of how it gets integrated into a lot of the church. What are some use cases you've seen, James?
Yeah. So recently what I've done really is down in San Diego, we put it on stage, hiding right next to like the pianos and the drums. So it basically becomes like a POV shot where you used to see those tiny little cameras moving back and right, on the little tracker. Now you have a PTZ that can actually shoot reverse shots, right? Reverse shots where you're lighting, the wash is really pointing into the people on stage worshiping, and also you can also get people off stage because the dynamic range is so great that you can see people off stage. So during messages, you can actually see a reaction shot of the audience really interacting with the joke that the pastor talked about, or just something that really resonated with them. You can get those reactions. We can capture all of that straight from the stage without having like a big tripod sitting there. And like Matt said, it comes in black. So like a lot of stagers are black boxes with an LED wall. Mm-hmm. Pianos are usually dark color. You can always, you can barely really see that in the background. It's just hiding there. So you can just get a shot of that really, really well pair with all of the other cinematic cameras, because we basically take some of our existing sensors and put it in those cameras so that it matches really well. And you can also just color those cameras to really look the way that you want it to. So it's a really big value for churches who want to create more of a interactive experience online.
That's great.
And that's
what about control?
Yeah. So right before I get to control, I just want to bounce off something James just said. He mentioned how it fits in really well with our other camcorders, because literally the sensors and the optics that are on these PTZs are straight out of our camcorder line. So you're literally getting the same optics and sensors as you would from our camcorder. So these PTZs are capable of, depending on what model you get, of 4K 30p, or you can do 4K 60p if you get the higher end N700 model. And these have 3 GSDI outputs. They have HDMI outputs for the 4K. They have 12 GSDI outputs for the higher end for the 4K.
Genlock is also very important.
And Genlock, of course, to go in with your switchers. So really a nice array that you can make exactly match any free roaming camcorders you might have at the same time. You might have some handheld shots that are tied into the same switcher, the same controller, and you can just intercut between those seamlessly, because all of the technology and the color science is identical.
So the color profiles themselves are the same as well?
Absolutely, yes. So it depends on which one. If you get the smaller PTZs, it offers a few different color profiles, but they're very close because it's the same color science behind these sensors. The higher PTZs do offer a Canon Log 3 if you need it, but all of our 709 profiles as well, including our 709 wide DR.
So
you do have those options. Yeah, if you're using a log, you can apply a LUT to it so that you're not having to look at the flat image while you're recording it. So really, all of the options in our professional camcorder feature set are just ported right over into the PTZs.
I think I might be like someone else who's listening to this and being like, camcorders? You mean like dad cams, like those things? But you're not. That's not what you're talking about at all.
I'm talking about
like you're like, yeah,
like yeah. So we have our XF605, which is our. If you're gonna have a camera that does not have interchangeable lenses, this is the one to get. The XF605 has 4K 60. It's got 12 GSDI output. It's also got 3 GSDI output separately, but you've got HDMI. You've got 3 different rings on the lens instead of one ring and a knob that you can assign, like some of our smaller camcorders that are still excellent quality offer. But this one really offers the professional set that you would expect because of the 3 rings for focus, iris, zoom.
With the ND filters.
And you can go as manual or as auto as you want on these in terms of control over them, so that you can just give it to a volunteer and you can be sure that they're going to run out and get some footage that's going to be very, very high quality and intercut with the rest of what you're getting.
So for a handheld option, it's a really great solution because it's more affordable than a different body and extra glass. I mean, because the glass is fixed, you're not having to worry about extra lensing and all that. And like you say, the ability to match the other products in the line is kind of automatic. So that's very
absolutely
cool.
That XF605 that I just talked about is the same sensor. It's the same technology, color profile, everything that you'll find on the N700 PTZ. So that's a perfect example of the camcorder and one of our PTZs exactly matching. So there's no problem in a live production or in post making those match.
Yeah. When we were shooting, we did a little comparison between our C300 Mark III, which is what we use at MxU, is what we use for all of our recording. And then we also compared the camcorder to that. And it's pretty close. The main difference is just aperture at that point in time. That I was using a 35 1.4, which is going to really blow out the background. So that's a different advantage point to that. But in terms of the look itself, like they look pretty identical, which was pretty cool to see.
I'm glad you brought up the C300 Mark III, because that is the one more step up. That has interchangeable lenses. So you do have to get the lenses separately. That can be EF or PL mount. So you can use any of our Canon EF lenses on that camera. But that is a very high quality. That moves up your sensor size one step more. I talked about 1/2 inch sensors and 1 inch sensors. Once you get to the cinema cameras like the C300 Mark III, you're dealing with a Super 35 size sensor. And that's literally the size that motion picture film has been for 100 years. That is distinct from full frame. Everybody talks about full frame. Full frame is actually the size that stills negative has been for the last 100 years, because a motion picture strip of film goes through the gate vertically and stills goes through the gate horizontally. And so on the same strip of film, they're actually creating different frame sizes. So full frame harks back to the stills size on that strip of film. And the Super 35 is emulating what cinema has been for the last 100 years. But everybody loves full frame, so it's become the new video buzzword.
See, hang around with Matt long enough, and you're going to learn a lot, not just about products, but about the history of film and history of photography. I love it.
See, I didn't know that either.
And that's not just because we're old, Matt. It's not just because we're old.
Because you got experience.
Yeah, well, I'm going to get really geeky for 2 seconds. This might be too much of a digression, but do you know there was, back when cinema was first competing with television, there was one widescreen format called VistaVision that did go through the gate horizontally to try to use a bigger negative size. And so Hitchcock shot a few films on VistaVision, North by Northwest and Vertigo, these things. So these were actually shot full frame back in the 50s. But that was eventually abandoned. And then VistaVision was used for visual effects and like The Empire Strikes Back, because it's a larger negative and smaller grain size, so that they could run it through the optical printer and not get too grainy. So there have been precedents for our full frame video capture in the past, but it really took off with the 5D Mark II. The 5D Mark II, Canon 5D Mark II, when they turned on the video option on that full frame stills camera, it took the world by storm, and everyone fell in love with shooting full frame video.
Interesting.
Then the T2i with the 60p in 720, so you could do slow motion. I remember that. That's when I got into it. I learned on a T3i. Yep.
And we're in the same era. Marcus and I are clearly the same era. T3i, T5, had a 6D.
Yeah.
Try videos on those, and it worked. It worked.
Yeah. Yeah, I really cut my teeth on the 5D Mark III, shooting all-eye 1080p.
Yeah.
I was media designer at the church that I was working at, and that's what we shot on. And so I learned, we didn't have external monitors or anything, so you're looking at that photo lens down there while you're walking around, which was always tough. And then there's no autofocus on those. Like, everybody today is really used to autofocus on everything, but it's like, man, turn that thing off and cut your teeth for a minute, like figure it out and then appreciate what autofocus can do.
Well, I'm glad that's a great segue into talking about some of the autofocus capabilities of these cameras, because a lot of the smaller PTZs have hybrid autofocus for us, and it has a sensor on the front of the camera that is literally measuring the distance to get the camera's focus in the ballpark, and then it uses contrast autofocus to finish the deal. So it doesn't go searching around for focus. And then as you get up to our higher camera models, and the XF605 I talked about with the attached lens, and the C300 Mark III with the interchangeable lenses, then you get into our dual pixel autofocus, which is really exact, and that's gonna hone right in on your subject. And that has your eye tracking, your face tracking. You could do face priority, or you could do face only if your subject's going to leave the frame and you don't want it to rack to the background. So the whole world of autofocus, as someone who came up in film, and I'd always have a separate focus puller doing focus. I was always skeptical of autofocus technologies. I was like, computer can't do what my team can do. But honestly, the autofocus is so good now that if you're running gunning, you can really depend on it.
That's a conversation I just had with Rusty about implementing auto focus or auto tracking in general into the live scenario. Because people are so focused, they've been so used to using that focus zoom grip just to pull that focus. But now, because of the facial tracking that we have, it allows you to do framing that's outside of the center shot. You used to have to move that little box from the middle to a 1/3 line to really get a passer's head right there. Now, if your subject's being tracked, I can put it on a 1/3 foot framing. I can put it on the left side, right side. It gives you a lot more creativity, and you can just customize the button so that you switch into a center focus on some of these cinema cameras, so that you get both of those worlds. Depend on the scenarios that you're in. Especially handhelds are being widely used in churches now. Having the flexibility to customize all those functions straight from like a click of a button, it's a game changer. It really helps the operators, and it also lowers the learning curve, really, right? For churches, there's a lot of volunteer-based stuff. Training volunteers is a big challenge for a lot of churches. It's expensive. It's a lot of time and resources to really help those volunteers get familiar with the cameras. And I think all these autofocus, PTZs, and really just having a simple menu system really just bring that whole bar down so that we can talk about for an hour. And a lot of people are like, all right, I think I got it. It's just like my phone with physical buttons. And they're just up and running on Sundays and they're good to go.
Right. And you mentioned tracking. Definitely. You said the magic word tracking when you were talking about tracking a subject. And that's something I just want to segue to very briefly, is that there's some add-on features to some of these, to all of the PTZs now, where you can do auto tracking, where you basically select on a laptop, on some kind of computer interface, you can select a silhouette that'll represent the size of your subject. You could kind of do a loose medium shot, or you could select the silhouette to do a close-up, and then the camera is going to lock on to your subject and follow them as they're walking around, and they're going to keep that same image size. So even if your subject is moving in depth, the zoom part of the PTZ will adjust to keep that image size that you've selected. And then there's a bevy of other options as well. You could do exclusion zones. So if you don't want the camera to pan over to a certain area, if you're doing a whiteboard presentation, you can make it so that the whiteboard stays in the frame, even if the subject leaves the frame, but otherwise it would track the subject within that area. So there's all kinds of rich nuances to the feature set that you can do now with these auto tracking options.
And the cool thing about those too is nobody's having to wear like a pendant thing, so that they have something to follow. Because I know for a while that's how things were happening, is that they had this literal beacon they wear under their shirt. But now
I think some lighting stuff is still doing that, right? I saw that in one of the trade show. They have a little thing that you mark the floors and it just jumps to a different point every single time. Yeah. That's a pretty cool concept, which still, but
cool that this happens without it.
Yes.
It's all computer based now.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, guys, we have a lot of churches who are getting into this. We want to have cinematic look. We want to shoot in 24. We want to have this depth of field that we never had with our ENG cameras before. So talk for a minute about some best practices for a church that is trying to sort of dip their toes in that water, especially if there's an LED wall behind a subject, if there's, motion blur is a little too much for some people. Like, how would you advise people to sort of get into this more cinematic look?
Well, great. Well, the key to getting that cinematic look is to get the depth of field such that your subject is separated from the background or from a foreground if you have foreground elements. So the best way to do that is to try to keep whatever lens you're using wide open. Keep the aperture wide open. If it's a 2.8 lens, keep it at 2.8. If it's a 1.4 prime, keep it at 1.4 if you can. And you're going to get a very small depth of field. And that's going to look more cinematic no matter what the other variables are. That's the one key one, is to keep your lens wide open. And then sensor size does matter. So if you get into your 1/2-inch sensor, you're going to have a larger depth of field. It's going to be harder to separate out your subject from the background on a smaller sensor than it will be on a larger sensor like a 1-inch or a Super 35 or full frame if you want to go whole hog into that. So those are two of the main things. But I would also say a lot of it has to do with camera placement. Try not to place the camera such that your subject is against a flat wall. Try to get some depth behind your subject so that those other factors can come into play. Because if your subject's right up against a flat wall, there's nothing you're going to be able to do to really make that cinematic. But if you can come at it with a slightly different angle to the camera and suddenly shoot off the wall into some depth, then that's worth exploring if the camera can be there instead. So it's a lot about camera placement and depth, and a little bit of camera movement can go a long way too. If you have a manned camera and you can get a slider there and you can just do a slow slide around your subject so that the background is shifting very slowly, it's kind of a cool cinematic look. So movement will often really help sell that cinematic feel as well.
Yeah, I think Matt touched on a really good point. I think movement is what I would have brought up as a first thing. PTZ has a lot of movement. You can pull in and pull out, push in and pull out on the cameras. That gives a certain movement to it. And you see a lot of churches go into rhythm tracks. A lot of them go into handhelds. A lot of them go into dactyl cameras. All those are great solutions, especially if you have like a lens that can go from like 15 to 120. So it gives you a lot more options of while you're moving left and right, you can push in, you can pull out, just like how you would do it on a PTZ. But on a cinema cameras where you implement a little bit of that human shakiness to it. And then you see all those cameras on stage now where you're hand holding like the C70 right here. Great camera for handheld. You get those cinematic lenses at a very wide open aperture, really get into that hand on the piano, that drum in the action, shooting through all those cymbals or whatnot just to capture, every motion on there, right? Like Drake always teaches, just if you don't know what to do, just move your cameras in like a figure 8 kind of movement, just so that your camera is constantly having a little bit of that movement. But I think Jeb brought a really good point, is that what if like those motion blur really gets people like motion sickness or whatnot? Well, the cameras are able to pull an image at 60 frames just for the iMac, so that people in the audience are like not looking at that with a lot of blur or a lot of trails on their movement. I think that's one thing that Canon really offers, is that all of our cameras are capable of shooting at those film frame rates, are also at a standard kind of IMAX frame rate, which is great for churches that really don't have the resources to have two separate camera just to capture two things. You want one camera that can do both things, and a lot of our section can really achieve that for you.
Yeah, and that frame rate is a big deal. 2398 is sort of thought of as the cinematic frame rate. For 100 years, sound film, once sound came in 1927, they set the frame rate to 24 frames per second because it was the slowest speed that would stay in sync with sound. They did it purely for the economics of it, and yet now it's what we're used to when we think cinema, because everything since 1927 was shot at 24 frames per second. And it has a little kind of jitteriness to it that is smoothed out if you go to something like 60 frames per second instead. And so what I know a lot of churches are doing is that they'll use sort of 60 frames per second for the message, and then if they go to the band, maybe they'll do 2398 for the more cinematic look for that. So you can actually vary up your frame rate for different effects throughout the service and get different results. And you could do that with the push of a button. The Canon cameras have an option to go from 60 to a pull down, a 2398 pull down with the touch of a button. So make it as seamless as we can.
That's great. Marcus, anything else you would add to this conversation, this topic?
Yeah, I think for churches who are still using ENG cameras, I think maybe just understanding that the sensor size is, I mean, from when I, in my time of coming up through as a photographer to just dabbling in video and now doing what I do, is like, I use Super 35 cameras here every day, but personally I own an R6, which is a full frame camera. And then I have a 5D Mark III at home, which is full frame, but I learned on a T3i,
nice,
which is APS-C, which is actually smaller than Super 35. And so I think there's a lot of all these different sizes out there. And, I think even, everybody might be thinking like, I need to do the full frame. Like I need a full frame camera to get the most possible. That I think there's two things to think about. First off, moving from ENG to Super 35 would be a massive difference, or even just the 1-inch sensor. It's going to be a huge difference in the image that you get. But also, secondly, something that you might not be thinking about is that your cameras will now effectively be further from your images because you've created that larger sensor. So there are benefits to these things, but there's also things that you have to take in consideration. It's like, well, if I move my A cam, if I may change that to a cinema camera, I'm probably going to have to move that forward
or a longer lens,
a good bit, or get a lens that can zoom in that far. And that's why a lot of people are running with the 25 to 250 or 50 to 1000. It's just because it's to make up that difference. But a lot of those also have teleconverters and, things to help make up for that difference. But those are some of the first things that I think about. Is like, okay, I think understanding maybe the differences in sensor sizes will help paint a clearer picture for some people, because they may not realize just how small an ENG sensor really is.
Yeah.
It's really tiny.
And if they make that change and have to change out the glass, then that's a massive undertaking in terms of budget. And, that's a lot of glass to be able to have the same result. So again, just understanding those variables is a huge part of this. You can't, so for the video engineer or the video director at a church, or the worship pastor who's in charge of all the production team, if the pastor comes and says, hey, we want to get this look that so-and-so church down the road has, you better know what you're getting into in terms of how to have that conversation, because it's not just as simple as the flip of a switch on the frame rate button. It's, there could be a lot of other things at
back
play.
end system, front end system, everything, right? And I know it's
and
if you're go for it.
Oh, if your switcher's still running like 1080p, the benefit is that you will be able to upgrade cameras, and not necessarily your switcher just yet, because the cameras can run in
4K,
right?
It's a different story.
Yeah, way different story. You're probably including your, IT department and whoever's paying the bill on the internet. So that's
a big switcher. You got to switch out all the fiber cables and make sure everything can pass through all that data for you. But I think Jeff brought up a really interesting thing, is that its price is really important. 25-250 is an expensive lens for that distance, but I think what's unique about Canon is that we offer something that fits everybody's budget, every church size's budget. That's the message I've really been preaching in the last year that I've been here, is that you don't have to sacrifice, spending a lot of money and just sacrifice the quality. You can really get the compact servos, which also reach 200 millimeter, slightly slower on a lens, but it does reach that distance that you need. And you can, like Marcus said, you can bring in the extender. On this lens, it's built in with a 1.5, but you can also purchase the external extenders that go in the back of the lens to push out to like a 400 millimeter, which for most cases, for most churches with that budget, is perfect option for it. And we have an 18-80 to really get onto a wide shot, medium shot. So the combinations of those really open up the doors to medium-sized churches to be like, oh, you know what? I don't have to sacrifice anything to get a good quality cinematic look with Canon lenses and cameras.
Yeah, absolutely. And lenses are another factor when you ask the question about what can we do to make things look more cinematic, and lenses are going to make a difference. All the lenses are great and your subject's going to look beautiful, but oftentimes it's how does the out of focus background look when it's out of focus? And different lenses have different qualities of that. Those kind of circles of light you get in the background that are out of focus are called bokeh. And different lenses will create different kinds of bokeh. And for instance, we have our flex zooms are our new all manual cinema lenses that are very fast for zoom lenses. The full frame ones are T24s, and the Super 35 flex zooms are T17s, making them the fastest cinema zooms in the history of cinema zooms. But these have,
so when you say fast,
that's the iris.
When you say fast, you're talking about the speed of light.
I'm talking about how wide you can open the aperture at the widest, and when it's a very small number, people tend to say, "Wow, that's a fast lens." So a T17 is unheard of in a zoom lens. Usually, zoom lenses are 2.8s or 4s or 4.4s, and they hold that f-stop over the whole range as well, or a t-stop. So, but what's great about it is they have 11 blade irises. So when you do close down the aperture, the iris is actually what's closing down and letting less light into the lens. And if it's an 11 blade iris, it's a very circular opening, and that creates the shape of the out of focus materials in the background. So the kind of more circular and perfect you can get that lens, the iris, the leaves that close on top of each other, you'll create a more beautiful bokeh in the background. And so Canon, a lot of Canon lenses, the PTZs even have 9-blade irises. Most of them, the smaller ones, have 8-blade. But it really all ties in. All of these factors tie in to making something seem more cinematic and feel more cinematic, and you just have that reaction to it. And hand in hand with that, I would actually recommend one other hint is that you try to get light sources in the background of your subject. If you're lining up angles of the band, maybe try an angle that will bring one of the stage lights into the frame in the background. And different lenses are going to handle that differently and more cinematically. There will be some flare. Some lenses will not flare, but when they go out of focus, those lights will really take on a beautiful shape in the background. So I always try to create depth, not only with physical space behind the subjects, but with a bling of light in the background, or maybe it's a stained glass window back there, something that can go out of focus beautifully. And yet while it's emitting light, if it goes out of focus while it's a light emitting subject, it'll really add some nice depth to your shot.
Yeah.
That's a great piece of advice. And, I'm just keeping in mind, my anniversary is going to be right around the time that this episode releases. So I'm going to need a really nice bouquet. So I'm gonna
nice.
Sorry, dad joke.
I actually have to train myself to say bouquet because that's the correct pronunciation. I always fall in. So many people say bokeh.
That's what I say.
But then you're going to like Florida if you're going to Boca. So that's a whole different.
That's right.
It's a very American way to say it. It's not.
I never knew what the right way to say it is, but I think the idea of having a blurry background ties into another big question that churches are always asking. Now that LED walls are so popular in churches, the number one question we always hear is like, what about moire, right? Those things come into play with any cameras, but with the combination of having an anti-moire kind of filter built into the sensor, but also having a lens that's fast enough to kind of blur out that distance in the back, that eliminates the moire for a lot of churches. I get this question everywhere that I go. There's a LED wall in the back, regardless of your pixel densities, regardless how big that wall is. And it's always going to be a thing for cameras to face. And fast lenses really help your cameras achieve like that look without having those artifacts showing up.
Yeah. And again, it's placing your subject far enough in front of the wall that you can isolate the subject and not bring the wall into focus. But yeah. And then all of these cameras we talked about, the interchangeable lens cinema cameras, the fixed lens camcorders, the PTZs, they can all be brought together via Ethernet through a switch and then into one of our Canon controllers. Canon offers 2 different controllers. It's the IP100 and an IP1000. And both of these controllers give you the ability to completely shade the camera. You can go get in there and do all the different color profiles on your camera. But you can actually use the joystick and the zoom controls to pan, tilt, and zoom from these controllers. So you can select up to 100 cameras on the smaller IP100 controller, or you can link in 200 cameras on the newer IP1000. And the IP1000 actually comes with a 7-inch screen where you can view multiple cameras. It's a touch screen, so you could touch the screen and send focus to different subjects, depending on which camera is selected. So both of these controller options really bring the whole world of the Canon optics, the Canon color science, all of that together into a single place where you can control them easily.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Well, we had a ball learning from, filming with you guys when we did our courses on camera basics and not so basics. So it's always great to hear from your expertise, Matt and James. And as always, not being a video guy, I feel like I'm going to school every time I talk to you. So it's great for me because I'm learning all the time, not just about Canon products, but about video in general. And I think it's great. And your commitment to teaching people not just about a piece of gear, but about the why behind an approach or a best practice for achieving a great result is inspiring. So thank you for sharing that with us and with our community. Thank you guys for your partnership with MxU. It's a great experience for us, and we can't say enough great things about you guys and about the company. So thanks for being with us today. I know our listeners are going to love hearing from you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to be here and chatting with you about all this stuff I love.
Yeah, so it's really good to be here today, and it's great a partnership with MxU for many, many years to really bring kind of knowledge and help to the churches. And like I said, my job really is to find solutions for churches across America of all sizes, of all budget. We want to be able to serve this community with the best gear and really the best solution. And MxU with us are both doing that for this community. Both online and offline. In-person conference, a lot of people came up to me and just said, I learned so much from all the people that taught there, right? I think Jeff taught one of the sessions over there as well, and I work with Marcus a lot on the behind-the-scene cameras and stuff like that. So like it's really built for the community, and that's my role on the team with MxU so that we're working together to serve this community. So anybody who does have questions, reach out to MxU or myself, and we can work together on finding something for you guys that will work.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to put your contact info in the show notes here, James, so that people can reach out directly. But yeah, thanks for being here today. Marcus, thanks for taking a break from your edit bay to come and share some of your expertise as well.
Man, you guys had a really great convo there. I just love the fact that they've got products for the whole spectrum. I mean, I know that they make some of the great top end stuff, and they're really like, I don't know how else to say it, but like expensive, just high end stuff. But they have products that work for the churches that are trying to get into it, or the organizations that just needs function over just the great glass at this point. So I love that. Obviously, they have focused on the house of worship market and got a dedicated team for that. So hit them up, work with them.
It's cool.
And they've been a great partner for us. They supported us so well at MxU last year and continue to do so. So I love that so much.
Yeah. And I love how they're, the color science actually is the same technology through the whole line. So if you've got a fixed lens in one of their camcorders, and then you've got a removable lens, interchangeable lens in one of their C300s, the color is going to be the same. And so that to me is like, okay, no matter where you are on the spectrum, even if you start small and upgrade over time, the quality of the image and the quality of the color is going to be consistent. So you can do that with confidence. And they have a great team that wants to support you in however they can. So it was fun to get to know them a little better.
Love that so much. Well, where are you headed next?
Well, I'm going to be at MxU filming some content over the next couple of weeks, and then MxU pop-ups. And so I can't believe that's only, less than 3 weeks away. It's going to be awesome.
That's amazing.
Can't wait.
I need to go home
Phoenix
for a few days and hang out.
Yeah.
See my fams and stuff. And then I've got to go to Phoenix actually for a little bit for a corporate thing. And then I'll be home for a minute. I've been out on the Phil Wickham tour. I don't know if we talked about that.
Oh yeah. How's that going?
And that's been amazing. Honestly, we should bring the whole crew on for a podcast and just let us fight it out. Hear the dynamics of the touring crew. But
that would be awesome.
We got some young ones and some old grouchy ones like me. But it's been super fun. And, obviously Pat is out there, a friend of ours, and Benjamin Hastings, who incredible songwriter, and Phil, and they've been just really great special nights. So I love it so much. So
I love it.
If you're near a Phil show, come see us.
Is it churches or theaters or arenas? Like what are the venues?
It's big churches and theaters, so it's 50-50.
Okay.
That's great. It's been just rad.
Well,
yeah.
Phil is such a great human and great singer and great songwriter. I think, how he resonates with an audience live is it's great because his heart for Jesus is on display, but also his talent as a singer is on display, which is always really fun to be a part of. So yeah, if you're around the Phil Wickham tour, you got to go check it out.
I love it.
Very cool. Well, brother, I hope you have a great week and a great weekend with the folks at Convoy. Tell everybody I said hi, and I hope your event goes great.
Catch you soon.